Composting 101 workshop takes place on April 16th from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. at the Recreation Activity Center in West Bloomfield, teaching West Bloomfield residents how to turn waste into nutrient-rich compost. So with me right here live on the splash is Michigan State University's Compost Systems Educator, Eliza Hensel. And I appreciate you for being here, Eliza. I want to start off by going to the first question. What is compost?
Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, composting is the process of taking organic matter and decomposing it in a really intentional fashion,
Okay.
and sort of monitoring that process. And at the end of that, you get compost. And compost is broken down organic material, whether that's food waste or leaves and yard debris. It could even be manure. But essentially, compost is a really rich soil amendment that helps our soils thrive, creates a really great growing environment.
Okay. I figure we start off with the most basic, right? Just to kind of cover that. Now let's get into what inspired you to bring this Composting 101 workshop to West Bloomfield.
Yeah, so as an extension educator for MSU, community outreach is really at the heart of what we do. And I work statewide to help people learn more about composting. So I'd been contacted by some people within the Parks and Rec department here in West Bloomfield. They invited me here to host this workshop, and I thought it was a great opportunity to really engage with this community. But also, West Bloomfield plays a really crucial role in the larger composting movement across Michigan. More densely populated areas like this have a really significant impact on waste management.
Okay.
You know, with limited space for landfills, it's essential to educate residents about our waste generation and the importance of mindful disposal. So
Gotcha.
getting to communities like this just helps spread the message on a larger.
No, I love it because I feel like this is the perfect place, the perfect community. The residents of Greater West Bloomfield, we're all in when it comes to being environmentally friendly. So I think this is a great addition to that whole stage that we want to be eco-friendly. So for residents who are interested in composting but may be new to it, is there one small step that they can take as soon as possible to get started in their own kitchen, backyard, or somewhere on their property?
Absolutely. I'd say for beginners, just start by learning a little bit more about the science behind composting.
Okay.
Understanding what kind of materials should or should not go into your compost pile and how to maintain that pile are key to having a successful end product, but also not making it a nuisance for yourself or your neighbors. We do offer a free master composter class online through the MSU Extension website, which will cover all the basic principles of composting. But another small thing you could start to do this week, just to get an idea of how much waste you might generate in your own kitchen, is start collecting any of your food scraps that you might want to start composting in a container or a gallon-sized freezer bin, and keep that in your freezer throughout the week. And then by the end of the week, you can get a visual of, okay, I make 1 to 2 pounds of food waste. Maybe I need this size of a bin. Or if you're going to start something, maybe like a vermicomposting bin using worms, you can build that according to size based on how much you're doing. But starting with just educating yourself a little bit more and learning the ins and outs of what makes a good compost is going to give you more success in the long run.
Once again, I'm an advocate for it. When I visited WB Parks recently, I saw the container that they had with it, and I saw the sign said compost. What is this? Me just being nosy, didn't really read all the way. I just lifted it up. I saw dirt and worms. I said, what is this? But now I'm putting all of this context together. It's making sense. I love that we're going from being more conscious of recycling. Now we're going into composting and using that waste more beneficial. So I love that as well. By the way, with me right here live on the splash is from Michigan State University's Compost Systems Educator. We have Eliza Hensel just talking about Composting 101 workshop, which will be at the Recreation Activity Center April 16th, 5:30 to 6:30. Now, it seems like a great thing, composting, but can you just explain from a professional standpoint, how can composting benefit Greater West Bloomfield neighborhoods in terms of environmental health and sustainability?
Absolutely. So residential composting, when we're talking about that, we're probably primarily dealing with food waste.
Hmm.
And when food waste ends up in the landfills, right, you put it in your trash can, well, end of the week it gets picked up. It's going to decompose anaerobically in those landfills. And that means that it's decomposing and rotting without oxygen. That happens just based on how landfills are filled and kind of packed down. It's a different process
Mm,
when organic material ends up in a landfill versus getting composted. And so when it's decomposing anaerobically, it's going to emit methane, which is a really potent greenhouse gas.
right.
So in contrast, a well-maintained compost pile is going to decompose aerobically, meaning it's got oxygen. It's being turned, it's being maintained. You're monitoring that process a little bit more intently. And it's just a different chemical makeup and a biological microbiome within that compost pile. So it's going to stay aerobic. It's not going to emit as much methane as it would just rotting in a landfill. So by encouraging more composting in communities like West Bloomfield and all across Michigan and all
Right.
across the country, really, we can start to divert some more food waste from these landfills, therefore reducing some of these extra methane emissions, right? And to keep it simple, we don't want to put any extra methane up into the earth, excuse me, our atmosphere. There's many different sources of that. Food waste is not the only one, but if we can kind of cut that back a little bit from our food scraps going into the landfill, it's one small step that we can all take to sort of take change into our own hands.
Woo, Eliza, you had me at anaerobically. That was a big one right there. But listen, I still connected those dots, and I understand. Essentially, you're saying if the food waste or the compost, the food waste that we would use for compost goes to the wrong place, the wrong environment, it can produce methane, deadly gas that's not good for our environment overall. So if we're using our compost and creating it in a great way and using it efficiently, then we're actually, doing better for our environment, less methane, that type. So I hope I understood that right and regurgitated that right. But yeah,
Yes.
you threw some of those big words out there, and we love it though.
Learn a little
So
something new every day.
yeah. No, we love it. That's
So,
why we have you here. So I want to go back to speaking for those who are interested in composting, like myself, but may not
mhm.
have that big house with the big yard or all that space. So what types of composting systems work best for local households, especially with limited space, or even those who might have concerns for wildlife, deer or random dogs or whatever the case?
Yeah, so for your typical, household, maybe say where you do have a backyard,
Hmm.
starting with something really simple is the best. It does not need to be complicated. You can buy pre-assembled bins from Home Depot or Lowe's or stores like that. They'll typically be a tall plastic cylinder with some sort of closing lid on the top and a small door on the bottom to harvest out your compost once it's done.
Hmm.
Another really easy way that I've always started using, and with you just got a couple materials, go and get some hardware fabric from store. You can roll it out into a cylinder, tie it off, and it'll get the job done. If you do have pests or it's a little bit more of a problem, just keeping a really thick layer of any of your browns materials is the other important part of maintaining a compost pile.
Mm.
So when I say browns, I'm talking about wood shavings, mulch, straw or hay, any of that kind of carbon rich material. You want to make sure you're covering the top of your pile with a pretty hefty layer of that. And that'll help to keep those animals out as well. But for people who are maybe staying in an apartment and they don't have a yard,
Right.
you can always look to community gardens. Are there anywhere around you where you could bring your food scraps where someone else might be composting, or have the space outside where you
Mm.
could still participate in that but not need to do it at home? And then another good option for indoors composting or small spaces is vermicomposting.
Okay.
And that's keeping a bin of worms and you feed your worms. Little creepy crawly, not for everybody, but it's really cool to see. And you can do that totally inside.
Nice, nice. As I saw at WB Parks, by the way. So yeah, it can be done inside, even in a small environment as well. We appreciate that. Don't want to hold you up too much longer, but looking ahead, what are your hopes for how communities like West Bloomfield can lead the way in sustainable waste reduction practices statewide?
Yeah, I envision communities like West Bloomfield playing a really pivotal role in advancing some of these waste reduction efforts. If we can lead by example in some of these more densely populated areas, like I said before, we need these bigger communities to get on board with initiatives like this. One, acting alone might not make that big of a difference, but if we act together, we can really make a big change. The other great thing about having initiatives like this in larger cities is there's so much opportunity for community engagement, whether it's getting schools into composting programs to teach the kids, or community centers or local churches can serve as educational hubs and bring people together to learn and take action.
Okay.
Just like the compost workshop we're hosting here, it's in West Bloomfield, empowering our residents through giving them opportunities to engage with themselves and with their community members on this, and just hopefully amplifying that throughout the state a little bit more.
Yeah, I think we're all becoming, like I said, a little bit more conscious of our environment, our ecosystem, and how we can do better all together as a community. Lastly, the who, what, where, when of the actual event, the workshop that you will be hosting this week.
Yes, so we'll be at the West Bloomfield Parks and Rec Department. It's Wednesday night, 5:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. An hour long. Come and learn. Ask me your questions about compost. I'd love to help you get going on it. So come on out and learn to compost.
A lot to look forward to and learn. We want to thank you again so much for your time. Once again, from Michigan State University, Compost Systems Educator, Eliza Hensel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.